Is this gaming monitor ideal for hardcore competitive gamers that also want a color accurate image? It's called the AOC Agon Pro AG256FS, which sports a flat 24.5 inch IPS panel that has a full HD resolution or 1080p and a refresh rate of a whopping 390Hz. There is support for adaptive sync technologies and also HDR. Now at the time of filming and in UK it can be found for £380. And in this video, which has been sponsored by the manufacturer, I'll be covering everything you need to know about it so you can make your own informed purchasing decision. Now to kick things off, I would just like to point out that if you do want to achieve the maximum refresh rate and resolution, you have to be connected up to the singular DisplayPort 1.4 input. This is because the two HDMI 2.0 ports will limit you to 1080p at 240Hz. Now with that in mind and the monitor connected over DisplayPort to my RTX 3080, I went ahead and did my objective tests. First off, in terms of its input lag, it was clocked in at 1 millisecond. And while it might not look overly impressive in this larger graph, you'll be able to see over here in the comparison of other 1080p monitors, it is actually pretty impressive. And indeed, all the monitors that I've recently tested actually do a stonking good job when it comes to the overall input lag. Now when it comes to playing a game such as Counter-Strike 2 or Valorant or indeed any other games, the monitor will actually respond very quickly to your mouse inputs. I would like to highlight over here that these figures were attained with the low input lag mode enabled via the monitor's OSD. I'm not sure why you'd ever want to disable it. But as a disclaimer, if you were to enable adaptive sync technologies such as AMD FreeSync or NVIDIA G-Sync, the mode will be grayed out. Although I can say subjectively, because I've got no sort of objective measurements for these type of tests, here the monitor did still actually respond very well while running NVIDIA G-Sync with my overall setup. Now aside from its input lag, what about when it comes to its response time? Well, here there are a few different overdrive modes that you can select via the monitor's OSD. The higher you go, you'll get a faster response time, but the caveat is that you'll get a worse visual experience, at least when it comes to the overall inverse ghosting. To demonstrate this, I'm using the OSRTD tool, and with the overdrive set to off, you can see at the bottom left hand side of your screen the average initial time, which translates to average G2G, which is quoted by most manufacturers. Here it clocked in at 5.94 milliseconds. With the overdrive set to weak, this drops down to 4.7 milliseconds. On the medium preset, it drops down to 3.25 milliseconds. While on the strong preset, you can see it goes down to a pretty impressive 2.8 milliseconds. Although do notice that the percent in window just above it sits at 63%, therefore not always hitting the 390Hz refresh rate window, and the RGB overshoot towards the middle of your screen does actually have a lot more error, for example if we compare it to the medium mode. Now the visual experience over here will be shown via the UFO ghosting test, and yes, as you'll be able to note that in the strong mode preset there is some inverse ghosting, which might throw off certain users while playing certain games which are more graphically intense. While playing a game like Counter-Strike 2, it didn't throw me off in the slightest. Now you will also notice over here that there is a boost mode preset. And yes, this monitor does have motion blur reduction technologies. And with the boost mode, it effectively goes to the maximum overdrive mode while also giving you the maximum MBR setting. You can actually tailor this if you so wish, for example, going on the medium or the strong preset and then adjusting the MBR slider where you've got 20 different level increments to do from. This is effectively another means of actually customizing it, while the boost mode is kind of like a maximum shortcut. Now here it is also nice to see that you've got something called MBR sync, which effectively means that you can use MBR simultaneously with adaptive sync technologies, which is actually quite a rarity, specifically given that the MBR also operates at the maximum refresh rate and resolution of 1080p at 390Hz. Now this does actually perfectly bring me onto adaptive sync technologies, and here the monitor has not got a native G-Sync module, and as such has got a VRR range from 48 up to 390Hz. Now in my case, I've got an RTX 3080, and when connected over DisplayPort, I was able to run the NVIDIA Pendulum demo without incurring any sort of black screen issues or flickering. Better still, I was also able to run this simultaneously with HDR enabled. Indeed, the monitor has got Display HDR 400 certification, which can be handy in certain scenarios. Although, in my opinion, it would be better to disable HDR because you've got more controls in SDR, for example, brightness controls and the color accuracy, and indeed in this respect, Display HDR 400 does have its limitations due to the overall brightness limitations that this monitor can achieve. Moving swiftly on, we get onto image quality, and as a reminder, you have got a flat 24.5-inch IPS panel with a matte coating to it. It also has that resolution of 1080p and a refresh rate of 390Hz. Now, 3D Monitor's OSD, you have got a dedicated sRGB mode, and through said mode, I was able to put it through my calibrators, and I noticed a gamut coverage of 96.3% and a gamut volume of 98.6%. Below, you can see how it compares to the standard. As for the average delta-E, it's actually really impressive at 0.85, while the maximum delta-E sits at 4.87. So therefore, it can be used for some serious image editing work or video grading. Its tested contrast ratio sat at 1062:1, while the measured white point clocked in at 6896 Kelvin at 100%. As for its gamma curve, it's pretty much bang on to the 2.2 standard. Now, outside said mode and going on to the native mode with the warm preset, you'll be able to see that the gamut coverage and the gamut volumes have been positively affected. And indeed, this monitor has got a wider color gamut and therefore affecting the Adobe RGB and the DCI-P3 color spaces. Focusing on the latter, you can see how it compares to the DCI-P3 color space, while the average delta-E and maximum delta-E sit at 3.19 and 5.94 respectively. So not as color accurate in comparison to the sRGB mode. As for the measured white point, it does shift at 7334 Kelvin at 100%, and as for the gamma curve, in comparison to the 2.6 standard, it's a little bit off. Although it's worth noting over here that the gamma level 3 mode was selected via the OSD in order to get that increased level of gamma, which is required for the color space. Now, aside from color performance, what about when it comes to peak luminance? Well, here in HDR, I clocked in 490 nits, while in SDR, it does also get pretty bright at 418 nits, so therefore it can be used in a bright sunlit room. It also has got a boost or MBR20 brightness, which is locked at 182 nits. Do remember you've got 20 different increments, and this will affect the overall brightness that you have. The lower the MBR level, the higher the brightness will be locked at. As for the minimum brightness, it gets all the way down to 43 nits and therefore should be perfectly usable in a completely pitch black environment. On that note, when it comes to brightness uniformity, you'll be able to see my results, at least with my panel, where I appreciate it is panel lottery. The same could be said about the overall backlight bleed, and given it's an IPS panel, it's no surprise that there is a little bit present. Although it's worth noting over here that this image, or these images should I say, were taken in a completely pitch black room with the monitor's brightness ramped up to 100% and with a black image. So moving on from these tests, I would like to talk about its build quality, and here it's got a three-sided borderless design with a relatively thin bottom bezel. You've got a black and silver finish to it. The stand itself has got an asymmetrical design, which I'm not overly fond of, but will be potentially appealing for hardcore gamers who just want to shove their faces straight into the monitor due to their odd keyboard and mouse setups. Now, the monitor stand itself is actually very sturdy and provides you height, tilt, pivot and swivel adjustments, therefore allowing you to get the best sort of ergonomics. You can of course replace the built-in stand with a VESA compatible one, and therefore allowing you to place it on a monitor arm or a multi-monitor setup. Now, at the back of the monitor there are some RGB lights, and yes, you can customize them or fully disable them if you so wish. I opted for the latter because they're not exactly bright enough and don't really serve a purpose. Now, in order to do this, you'll want to use the monitor's OSD, which can be accessed via a small little joystick button that's found at the back right-hand side of the monitor, or via the included puck, which makes it a little bit easier to access. Now, through the monitor's OSD itself, it's actually very comprehensively laid out and provides you all the right options that you require. Furthermore, you've also got the AOC G menu software, which is a further extension to the hardware-based OSD and provides you even further degree of customization and options to play around with. Now, through the settings, you might have noticed an audio tab, but it's worth noting over here that there are no built-in speakers, but rather this setting is linked with the output volume of the 3.5mm jack. Handy, for example, if you have a set of headphones, because it allows you to plug it in directly into the monitor. Aside from this, you have got 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, 2 of which are conveniently found on the left-hand side of the monitor, making it easier to access, for example, if you want to connect up some peripherals or a flash drive. So there we have it. Hopefully you've enjoyed my detailed overview of this AOC monitor. I'll be curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below. And of course, if you have enjoyed the video, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.